Our next segment is called Busting the Myths. And this is one of my favorite segments because there are so many myths out there about this whole journey, whether it's GMAT, whether it's application process, networking, so many myths out there, right? So, Akshay, let me start with you. What was some of the general myths that you came across in your journey? Top two, top three myths that you can talk about, and how did you course correct them over a period of time?
Okay, I think I'd like to address the elephant in the room, that the question that everyone has regarding GMAT, your quantitative ability, and your fit for the MBA. And I think all of them need to be addressed together because that's how the B school looks at them. So I think that's one of the biggest myths that people have when you approach an application, that it's, and this is pertaining to a very concrete score that you have in your head, thinking if my score is above a certain level, I'm in. If my score is below a certain level, I'm out. Unfortunately or fortunately, the process is not that discrete. It completely depends on the mapping of your score with your profile. And I think that's a big part of the application that people don't really comprehend. Just to give my example, I think my GMAT score obviously will be tied to my background, which is a quant heavy engineering background. So my GMAT score will obviously be looked at in relation to my engineering background, also in relation to the fact that I have worked 5 years in consulting, which is a quant heavy kind of a background. So there is no way I can pinpoint a GMAT score and say that this is a particular score above which I'm going to get rejected and below which I'm going to get accepted, or vice versa. Basically, it's not that black and white a process. And the big caveat to this being that when you look at your FT rankings and your pages of your big schools, it gives you a range of GMAT score that you should try and target. And I think range being the key operative word here, because in the end, it's all about odds, right? You're basically looking at probabilities. And if the school has a certain range over a course of the last 5 years, 6 years, that's a trend you should be typically targeting. So say the range of the average GMAT of a particular school is 680 or 690. And you have a very typical, you have a profile which is very generic, then you should be slightly closer to the range or slightly above that range. If you have a profile which is slightly unique, you can be a little below that. Broadly, the range for a particular school like this should be somewhere between like a 670 and a 710. And a range is the most important thing and not a discrete score. I think that is one thing that candidates don't realize early on in their application process. And it is completely subjective to your profile, your work experience, and the way you approach the skill sets that the MBA looks out for.
Amazing. I think Akshay addressed the elephant in the room, like you mentioned. GMAT is the key operative question that most people struggle with, including myself when I was doing it. And just to, probably summarize what Akshay said, I think for people who are out there, don't just tie yourself down to just one number. Look at your profile, tie it to a broad range that school operates with, and different schools operate at a different average GMAT. But be mindful of the fact that it is just an average number and the range is typically quite wide. And based on your profile, if you can bring in certain other aspects in your profile, I think GMAT can be compensated. And Akshay put it quite nicely. Ambar, if I could, ask you if you would want to, bust some of the myths that a lot of people, come across when they're applying. It could be some of the points I think we may have touched briefly in our earlier questions, but maybe around the visas, maybe around the rankings, maybe around scholarships, maybe around anything. The general myths that
before I jump to the other points, I have a different predicament with my GMAT. I too am an engineer, and there's this default assumption that being an engineer you need to have a broadly higher quant score. I didn't. I'm the engineer who had a higher verbal score, like significantly higher as compared to my quant. And I was worried because some schools did point that out to me. And so, this is not something we would be comfortable with. So that's fine. That's absolutely okay. That's not the end of the world. The other thing that I was talking about ignoring is don't ignore your AWA and IR. Because down the road, although it may not be something that is the only looked at factor during your applications, but some schools do look at that. And specifically, if you have it very clearly mentioned in your profile, in your essays that you want to go into consulting, let's say, or maybe into a very quant-heavy field, the IR is looked at, and there's something I've heard from the admissions committee members directly in my interviews. So they do look at that. So I would say, so most people tend to be like, okay, I'm going to ace the quant, ace the verbal, and it's okay. Whatever is in the IR, we'll wing it whenever it comes. So don't do that. Regarding the other points, I I think one thing is that I 100% agree with what Akshay said is play the odds, right? So if you are in a certain range, don't try to reinvent it and be like, okay, I have a phenomenal everything else and I'm playing the odds. Fine, it's okay. If it's your dream school, if it's something that you are really invested in, go for it. But do know the time you're taking away from a school that you have a good shot at, you're probably taking it away from that because you can't do about 25 schools or as many as you can. So like, you want to put your best foot forward. And in that case, that's why the research and homework is extremely important. I've been through the process of carpet bombing. It doesn't work. I've burnt my fingers with that. It doesn't work. It's better to stay focused. The third thing I'd say, and this is again, as I touched upon earlier, is the profile that I have was very non-standard. Just because you don't have a brand name on your profile, it's not the end of the world. A lot of people told me this is that, oh, you've not worked at one of those Fortune 500 companies. They're not going to recognize you for it. Okay, yes, it looks great on your resume. But is it something that the schools will view as a rejection factor? Absolutely not. What people don't realize is that your resume is going to be 4 or 5 bullets below that. And that adds value. And that's what you really have to bring out. And the fourth thing, and this is something, and I know my point of view on social work and volunteering work is very different. The things I've done from my college days to what I was doing my professional life as well. Don't start something T minus 365 days of your applications or T minus 180 days. It's very obvious. So even if you've probably taken care of, or you funded some children once a year, maybe in the last 3 years, it's fine. Talk about the reasons of why you did that. Talk about the smaller things. Maybe you're in an intensive job that makes you work 12, 14 hours. They get it. You don't have time to invest that much in social work. It's fine. It speaks that you have a trend of doing that. Reflect that. If you start the last minute, I mean, they're the admissions committee of one of the best business schools in the world. They're going to see through you. So these are the 4 things that I would stick with as the myths, or at least the points to be aware of.
Amazing. So, given that we spoke so much about GMAT, if I could ask quickly, does IESE as a school accept GRE or is it only, does it only screen candidates based on GMAT? And is GRE looked in a negative light or is it at the same level playing field as GMAT when admissions teams are looking at the candidates? Any of you, if you have anything to add?
Akshay, you want to take this one? Because I really don't have a lot of perspective on the GRE particularly.
Yeah, sure. So I think, to be honest, I've done a little bit of research on this, so I can give my 2 cents on it. In terms of, I think, again, it's a trend. I think it started only in the last few years that school have opened themselves up to the GRE as an exam via the GMAT. But since we're in the process of them accepting it, and it's only natural that biases take time to heal over time, there's no doubt that I think if you view two applications, you will have some sort of bias in your head when it comes to GMAT because it has been the gold standard of B-School applications for so long. And while I hope that it changes because over a course of time, I think we're in that stage where it's changing, where definitely I think from a psychological point of view, they will look at the GMAT as a slightly higher, give more weight to it. But that being said, I think that trend is changing and people are a lot more open to GREs and you're giving that exam for your entrance exam. I think one thing that I would like to highlight in this respect is how sort of schools will look at the GMAT to GRE conversion as a factor. And I think this ties down to what I mentioned earlier regarding what your profile looks like. And for example, if you have a background as a communications expert or you've done something that is not related to quant at all and your graduation is also like a bachelor in arts or something like that, so you have no quantitative background and you give the GRE and your quant score is low. Now this sort of ties into the whole process that they don't see you as a good fit because they don't think you can cope up with the quant rigor of the program is what and vis-a-vis, if you have that background and you go end up getting a 170 or 117 GRE, then they sort of do realize that, this person does have a quant background. I don't really need to look at anything else because he's sort of clearing that bucket of my application. And this will, as I said earlier, change from application to application, case to case. There really is no right answer, and it is truly the biggest black box, if you ask me. So all you can try and do is, I think, create like a small map of your strengths, your weaknesses, and just try and see how you can plug those weaknesses with the different tools that the application process is trying to provide you.